Good evening to you all. Thank you all for coming today. And also, thanks very much to BIC for organizing this talk and for giving me a very prompt date for this talk and discussion. Also, thanks to Naresh Kirti, my friend, for being here and agreeing to engage in a conversation with me. Let me just begin right away. Um, okay, let me just first begin by telling you something briefly about the how the translation project came to be. The choice to translate Tanuja's memoir actually came initially from uh, um, an essay that I wrote for a volume on queer literature in Indian languages for a friend who edited the volume. And I initially was looking for queer texts. I mean, I'm talking about uh, gay and lesbian texts in Tamil. And from what I discovered, I may be wrong. I may not have read everything, but from what I discovered, I got the sense that a lot of these texts were actually not very well crafted. And many of the characters in these fictional texts were reduced to tragic victims of stigma and homophobic violence. And so I got the sense that, and maybe someone can correct me, but I got the sense that there was a dearth of well crafted queer literature in Tamil. And I also did notice that the memoir and the autobiography was not a genre that was adequately explored by queer people or people who identify as queer in Tamil. So, but on the other hand, there's also the sense that this genre, the queer, the memoir or the autobiography, has been used far more by trans gender people, specifically trans women. I don't see so many trans men, at least in Tamil. They're still a less visible uh, uh, population, and so that's how this began. And actually, the essay that I actually ended up writing was a comparative analysis of uh, um, A. Revati's autobiography and Tanuja's autobiography, which I then ended up translating into English. Um, Unlike many of the other notable memoirs by Indian trans women, what is actually remarkable, or maybe South Asian, I guess, since Tanuja is by birth Sri Lankan, what is actually remarkable about Tanuja's memoir is the fact that it's. I mean, like the title itself suggests, it's a memoir of transition and migration. So it really is about how the protagonist Tanuja is someone who transitions genders, but also transitions political boundaries because she moves to Germany via India in 1991 when she's just 3 months old. So it's a very kind of fraught and a very kind of complex negotiation with gender as well as her own status as and let me clarify, her preferred pronouns are her, not they and them, so which is why I'm saying her and she. So she has a fairly complex relationship with her own citizenship as well. Let me just begin with a slight context, maybe something about the legal context before I actually move to the memoir. I'm sure some of you may be already familiar with this, and this will bear some relevance to our discussion of the memoir. You probably already know the 2014 National Legal Services Authority versus Union of India Supreme Court judgment, which passed a landmark ruling upholding everyone's right to self identify their gender. This was just a judicial directive recognizing the third gender in terms of providing social and education reservations, as well as ensuring non discrimination in employment, healthcare, and education. It was left to the successive draft bills of 2016, 17, and 18, the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights draft bill, to operationalize this directive into enforceable law. But many of these draft bills were also seen as regressive by trans people because it did not allow trans people to self-identify. Self-identification identification of gender would be done by district screening committee, and there would be, and gender reassignment surgery was also seen as compulsory for in order to basically um, um, qualify as somebody who is transitioning or is a transgender person. And it also in many ways criminalized begging, and transgender children were also not allowed, they were not they could not be separated from their families. So that also kind of reduced the kind of choices, the autonomy that trans people would or should have enjoyed. um, there are many other provisions that I will not go into, but you also have the 2019 Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act, which again prohibits discrimination in employment, education, healthcare, and public services. It seems, at the face of it, a very equitable kind of law, but act, but there's also the sense that implementation has not been very equitable and uniform. So one needs to. So therefore, I guess the struggle for self-identification, struggle for trans people and their rights has been, it's an ongoing struggle, which and I think many of the emergence of many trans memoirs in the 21st century is a response to this, to the fact that uh, there's still, it's still an open struggle and question which has not been resolved. So so I mean, there are many other details which I will not go into. Maybe we can go into them in the discussion. Um, and so there is This is the Indian context. You also have the Sri Lankan context in terms of how legal gender change has been permitted since 2016, but it requires psychiatric certification and no mandatory surgery for someone to identify as trans. Um, there's also gender affirming care that is technically legal, but access is limited. Injections are unavailable, parental consent is needed for surgery, and so on. And the gender recognition certificate process is somewhat cumbersome, requires psychiatric evaluations, and has low administrative clarity. This is the trans legislation in Germany, which again is very interesting because if Tanuja had actually written her memoir today, I think she would have had a very different kind of arc or trajectory, because this suggests that Germany has really made a lot of progress in terms of replacing the 1980 Transsexuals Act and coming up with the Self Determination Act, which was passed on April 12th, 2024, and came into effect November 1st of 24, where individuals above 18 can change their legal gender and first name via a simple declaration at the registry office after a 3-month notice with no medical or psychiatric requirements, parental consent or family court permission needed for others, a 1 year waiting period before another change is followed, and so on and so forth. The Act also allows a third diverse gender option alongside male female, unifying processes for trans, intersex, and non binary individuals. This again reflects the 2018 third gender law that again streamlines recognition under one unified law. So that's just a brief overview of these three nation states and their legislation. Now, let me just go into some of the quotations that I actually want to bring to your notice from the memoir itself, which I thought would be significant to our discussion and maybe might inform some of the questions that you would like to ask. So here, um, um, what for me is very interesting in terms of the ways in which Tanuja's memoir diverges in many significant ways from other Indian trans memoirs. uh, some of the significant ways has to do, of course, with her access to the internet, which is very different for let's say, many trans women from India who are, let's say, older to her, belong to an early generation, have not had access to the internet, are not English educated, because Tanuja is actually quite well qualified. I mean, she's a dental hygienist, but she's also had access to. I mean, she's also she also has knowledge of many languages as well. She's fluent with German and Dutch. And English as well. And it's interesting that she made a choice to write the memoir in Tamil and not any other language, a language which she learned herself when she was in when she where, in I mean, where she grew up in Germany. She actually went to a Tamil school where she actually learned the language well enough to be able to write in it. And I think a lot of it also has to do with the fact that she's Sri Lankan Tamil. And I think Sri Lankan Tamils, especially those who are refugees, those who are part of the diaspora, are people who have actually been a lot more loyal and a lot more well connected in terms of their relationship to the language. So here you will see that her education, her access to the internet, her access to education, and her life as an immigrant in Germany, which offers certain resources that may not have been possible back in Sri Lanka, as well as the her family's growing support, is something that has made Tanuja's life a lot more or a lot less precarious and fraught as it might have been otherwise. So this is my first quotation from the memoir, which I think is the first point I'd like to make in terms of trying to compare Tanuja's memoirs with other memoirs. Let me first go into what I feel are the similarities across these different memoirs by trans women, and then maybe I'll go into the ways in which they diverge. So, the very first point I'd like to make is the fact that childhood, of course, here is a very significant phase where trans women can, for the first and last time perhaps, enjoy a certain performance of femininity, which without being censured and without being stigmatized. So, the quotation says, I had a very happy childhood. I did not have to face any of the obstacles that I would face later in life. When I was 3, I felt an urge to wear my sister's clothes. Everyone complimented my femininity. They thought it was some sort of a game. With my coy laughs, I would imitate Tamil actresses and video jockeys. I never tired of watching cooking shows and beauty contests on television. I would comb and adorn my mother's hair and apply makeup to her face. My favorite toys were my Barbie doll and my small cooking dishes. And this is something that you will see across many trans women's memoirs, where childhood becomes a phase, a very precious memory of a certain freedom that was exercised in trying to maybe cross stress and also perform and act their femininity. Um, then you have another one where the performance of femininity also extends itself to spaces like theater and religious festivals, sexual intimacy, online video chats, pornography, and so on and so forth, where the trans woman is somewhat uh, free to express herself as long as she is online or on stage or in the act. Okay? So here again, until then, I had only ever dressed up as a woman within the confines of my house. My mother, who had enjoyed watching me dress up as a girl when I was 3, was no longer impressed. She began to shout at me for wearing female clothes indoors. But dancing during Christmas was a golden opportunity to appear before the city in women's clothes. I told my mother, I'm going to dance for Jesus Christ. She relented. When I appeared on stage and began dancing, the audience thought I was a woman. When they praised me, I wished that I could wear these clothes for the rest of my life. But I knew my mother would beat me if I went back home wearing them. Um, the next quotation has to do with um, one of the first sexual encounters that she has with a Tamil man. And again, let me just draw your attention to the fact that many of the men that she meets, dates, are Tamil men, right? And that's what's very interesting about the memoir, that despite the fact that it is set in largely in Europe, partly in India and partly in Sri Lanka, but mostly in Europe, most of the men that she actually meets are Tamil men, and it's a completely Tamil diasporic world, right? So, I mean, she meets Tamil men. She also meets hijras and other trans women who are Tamil speaking trans women from other parts of the Tamil speaking world. So, which is what I find very interesting. So, here again, Seelan used me for his sexual needs whenever he had time. He would insert his penis between my thighs and penetrate me like he would a vagina. It would leave me out of breath. However, our relationship did not give me any happiness, just sorrow. There was only one reason for putting up with it. When no one understood me, he was the only person who thought of me as a woman and treated me as one. What he did with me is what a man does with women. Now, this is a feeling that kind of recurs throughout the memoir. The fact that she needs men she needs to have some kind of intimacy with men, only because she thinks it would actually be a validation of her femininity, even if it involves a lot of violence and embarrassment and humiliation. Because the same men that she sleeps with or she has intimate connections with are the men who also humiliate her in public. They refuse to acknowledge her as a woman, and they also humiliate her for being, an effeminate gay man, right? So that is something that she constantly encounters in the early phase of the memoir. Um, Again, this is another very interesting quotation, which I think suggests what marriage or the act of marriage means to Tanuja, even if it is not legally sanctioned. Watching Tamil movies made me long to get married. I asked Seelan to tie a tali around my neck. He immediately agreed and secretly tied the tali at the Ganesha, and the tali is the wedding necklace that is worn as a sign of marriage. He immediately agreed and secretly tied the tali at the Ganesha temple on the banks of the river. I would hide the tali behind a picture of God at our home. When I was alone, I would put on a sari and tie the tali around my neck. That's page 14. In a later incident with another man, when he made three knots of the tali, three tears began to stream down my face. He took some kumkum and made a mark on my forehead. From that very moment, I was Satish's wife. A progressive woman would mock such traditional practices, but I really liked all these customs. Trans women will hold on to anything that makes them feel like complete women. And this is very interesting because I think Revati, another very important trans woman activist, who has also written her own memoir. Uh, Both these trans women are actually very conscious of the fact that what the kind of femininity that they idealize and desire and hope to embody are actually very traditional forms of femininity. And so they're very conscious of it. And I think for Revati, especially when she actually ends up moving to cities like Bangalore, where she actually meets other trans activists, especially English speaking activists, she realizes that there are many other sexual minorities, sexually marginalized groups, and people, depending on the class they come from, they actually end up becoming quite critical of these notions of conventional notions of femininity, right? But it's also important to realize that these notions of femininity are notions that are these dominant forms of femininity are what are available to people like Revati, because they come from small towns and they have been exposed to only these forms of femininity through their female relatives, as well as the movies they watch, cinema, and so on and so forth, right? So it's not possible to, kind of dismiss this. But it's also important to realize that these Tanuja and Revati especially are very self-reflexive, unaware of the fact that they idealize these forms of femininity. Um, Now, another very important trope that you see across these trans memoirs is the fact that many of these trans women are sexually abused when they are boys or when they're young, and they often wonder if their effeminacy is what drew the attention of these men. There was a bus driver who lived nearby. He must have been about 35 at the time. I was playing with my friends in front of his house when he called me inside. His wife and children were not at home. As we were talking, he took my hand and put it on his penis. I did not like what he did, and I certainly did not like him. I immediately screamed and called out to my friends as I ran out of the house. Why did he invite me in when there were so many other children around? Did he notice my effeminacy? After this incident, I stopped going there. Now, the other important point, like I mentioned earlier, was the role that the internet has to play with in Revati's life. This is another very important section somewhere in the middle of the book where she talks about how the internet kind of provided her with information and intimacy at a time when she was very lonely. The internet opened up a new world for me at a time when I was so lonely. I learned many new things. I made many new friends through the internet. I did not know that the virtual world would upset my entire life. I searched for the meaning of the English word gay. I discovered it was not that rare for two men to have sex. After I turned 13, my brother introduced me to a virtual chat room called TamilChatWorld.com. When my brother was not at home, I would chat under the name Mohana. I loved that name because Mayuran, the cousin that she was in love with Mohana. When they saw that name, several men would chat with me. I told them I was 18. No one knew how anyone looked. I was happy and excited to chat with them. There's another very interesting section which is not here, where she's again chatting, video chatting with someone, and she ensures that she actually shaves her face. She wears makeup, and she kind of also has these fake breasts, right? But she ensures that the camera does not go below her neck, right? So and she also has a voice which helps her pass off as female. So it's very interesting that these kinds of virtual spaces also allow her to negotiate with her own fears, her own, and it's kind of strangely empowering as well to be able to talk to men, anonymous men on camera, and make them believe that she is actually a woman, right? So I find that very kind of interesting, and we can probably have more discussions about these virtual kind of images of femininity. Um, this is another instance of how the internet actually helped her. I found some videos on Indian trans women. In one of these videos, there was a Tamil trans woman named Angel who described the lives and struggles of trans women in India. Then I watched a Singapore Tamil television program about trans women. A trans woman named Bhuvana spoke about her life and the challenges she had to face. She was emphatic when she said that trans women suffer because of their lives as sex workers and that they should leave their jobs. When she described her childhood and her journey, it resembled my own life. I would cry every day watching her videos. Through Bhuvana's videos, I discovered that anyone could acquire a feminine body with hormonal pills and that one could get a gender reassignment surgery done in Thailand. Her words made a bright ladder descend into my prison like heart that was enveloped in darkness. Another example, I once watched a television show on the internet called Ippadik Rose. The anchor was a beautiful woman whose voice revealed her identity as a trans woman. I sent her an email to introduce myself and ask if I could talk to her. Rose patiently listened to what I had to say and, like a specialist in the field, spelled out the contradictions that constitute different genders. She very patiently said that I was ignorant to think that my wish to become a woman was because of my disappointing relationships. She even said that I was born with a woman's sensibility and that I was not a homosexual but a woman. Right. So many of these trans people, women, when they're children, they often confuse themselves. They think that they're actually gay men. Then they realize that they're probably women trapped in male bodies. There are many other instances in the memoir where she even goes and asks somebody who was, who won the Mr. Gay Europe competition whether he would transition. And he said, "No, I'm very happy being a man who desires other men." Right. So there are these kinds of dilemmas that she experiences, which I also seen across other trans memoirs. Um, Another very important quotation, which has to do with how Tanuja, unlike, for example, someone like Revati, who's never left India, who's not very educated, not very privileged, ends up actually depending on the larger Hijra community of gurus and chelas. And she really can't escape from them. She can't be entirely live a life that's entirely independent of the Hijra community. But you will notice that Tanuja actually has a more autonomous and flexible relationship with the larger Hijra community because of her education, also because of her privileges, the fact that she's also not non dominant caste. Caste also is important, and that she also has a very supportive family. Right? This is just an example of some of the older trans women and the exploitation that they, and the ways in which they exploit younger trans women. Soon Telegam Party meaning grandmother, called me from Mumbai, and then Sundari Party called me from Singapore. They pestered me to give up my studies and become a sex worker. I politely refused. They mocked me by saying, "You're a potte." Potte, of course, here is a Tamil kind of derogatory term to refer to a man who is effeminate. "You're a fat bull of a man." They call me names like De, Poda, Vada, which are used by trans women to berate and insult each other. I learned that both these senior trans women extracted money from younger trans women who were made to do sex work, while older ones lived lazy and ostentatious lives. If anyone refused to give them money, they would be threatened with expulsion from the Jamaat, Jamaat being the larger society kinship network of Hijras. A trans woman who's no longer part of the Jamaat cannot go to places frequented by other sex workers or attend meetings of trans women. This threat allowed some trans women to become dictators. This is another very interesting passage, which is about what it means for Tanuja to pass off as trans or as women, as a woman, I kept asking my psychologist to get a doctor to prescribe hormonal supplements, but I would have to wear women's clothes for at least a year before I could be prescribed hormones. However, I hesitated to go to school to anywhere else in women's clothes because I had gained the muscular body of a young man and had begun to grow full facial hair. I feared that if someone looked like a man, dressed in female clothes, he could be beaten or even killed. I only wore women's clothes when I visited my psychologist, but I lied to him that I always wore such clothes. Before I left my house, I tucked my penis, and this is one section. The other quotation also has to do with trying to pass off. Before I left my house, I tucked my penis between my thighs and wore tight underwear. Even if someone felt my thighs, they would not find my penis. Um, when Ramesh tried to remove my brassiere, I felt ashamed and said, "There's nothing there." I sucked his penis. I did not hesitate to do it because my lack of a vagina and breasts made me feel inferior to women, and sexual acts were the only means I had of retaining a man. This is my last quotation. This again has to do with the very interesting and ironic relationship that she has to Sri Lankan law uh, concerning trans people and the German laws as well. Now that my surgery was done, I could legally change my gender to female and also change my name. I submitted the required forms to make changes along with a medical certificate, but my application was rejected. It was because I was still a Sri Lankan citizen. I was told that only trans women who are German citizens can legally change their gender. The law astonished me. It stated that foreign trans women living in Germany can legally change their gender only if they are from countries that do not allow them to change their gender. So you have to come from countries that are hostile to trans women to be able to become a German citizen. My application was rejected because Sri Lanka had laws that allowed trans women to change their gender. I was not only overjoyed but also a little proud of my country. Okay, so this is just to give you some food for thought, and maybe I will stop at this point. And maybe now Naresh and I could probably engage in some kind of a dialogue or conversation. Thank you.
I'd like to begin by reading a couple of anecdotes as well.
Sure. Yes.
So one of them actually overlaps with the first episode that you read. This is Tanuja's encounter with this person called Sheelan. So this is pages 13, 14. As I spent most of my time with older people, I was rather precocious. Also, I'd grown up watching television. Like the actors on the screen, I wanted to be alone in a room with a man with whom I had a secret relationship. There we would kiss and frolic. From watching television, I had a rough idea of what married couples do in bed. Watching Tamil movies made me long to get married. I asked Seelan to tie a tali around my neck. Yeah, and the rest is like you had in your
Yes.
slide. So people have seen this passage, and I'd like to read another little selection, which is um, which is from a section that's titled "My First Love." I was scared and refused. I was afraid of becoming pregnant. Mayuran said, and this is the cousin of hers called Mayuran, whom she describes as a first love. If you truly love me, you'll do as I say. When I understood that this was a way of proving my deep love for him, I did everything he asked me to do. I was madly in love with Mayuran. I wrote his names on the walls of my house and in my textbooks and spent most of my vacations at his house. Then Mayuran, Mayuran's cousins visited him. The elder sister was newly married. The younger sister was very beautiful. Both sisters liked me, and one evening, the three of us went to the neighboring Ganesha temple. Mohana and I sat outside the temple and talked. She plucked a leaf from a plant and used its stem to write Mayuran on the wall. My eyes were ablaze when I saw that. How could I tell Mohana that Mayuran and I were in a romantic relationship? As she was his uncle's daughter, there was a strong possibility that they would get married. I felt miserable. I cried when I was alone. I was unable to kill and bury my love for Mayuran. The next day, I asked Mayuran to marry me. He laughed and said, "Are you crazy? I suppressed my welling tears and asked him, "Don't you love me?" He replied, "Two men can neither love each other nor get married." I asked him if he loved Mohana. He said yes and stared into my eyes. I looked at him and wondered silently, "Didn't you think of me as a woman when we were together?" Now, both of these passages are kind of in the same vein, but I think what you wouldn't gather if you don't read it in the context of the book and the material before and after is Tanuja's age when this happened. So I think it's a bit childish if I convert this into a classroom exercise and ask you to guess. It's not nice. But in the first passage, where she had this episode with a neighbor called Sheelan, she was 7 years old, and in this passage she's probably 10 or 11. And I think that's something that merits a little discussion. And I feel um, we, and by we I mean every concentric circle of we, those who are in academia, those who both experientially and intellectually think about various forms of sexuality, we have a very crude, very underdeveloped sense of children's sexuality. And for example, even in the medical world, the term they use is precocious sexuality, and the definitions of it are in terms of the appearance of secondary sexual characteristics. So it's entirely physiological, and there's no discussion and there's no thought um, about children's sexuality. And I think these episodes kind of highlight that. And in a situation like this, even I think I would even question our use of terms like precocious. What does it mean to say precocious? Because in all of these situations, perhaps the onus is on whichever person is the adult to behave in an ethical and in a reflective manner. And this we can see how these episodes, in a way, they are like a thread that run through many of Tanuja's experiences for a long time. So
I just,
perhaps you start
yeah, I
by
just wanted
responding
to
to
add
that.
something to what you said. That's a very interesting observation because in another section of the memoir, she actually says very explicitly early on that she's not ashamed or abashed to confess that she liked to um, something along the lines of dominate
Correct.
men with lust.
That's right.
And so she doesn't seem to be embarrassed or ashamed about it, but she also says that I would avoid men I didn't like or I wasn't drawn to. And she also, and the fact that when she is abused, it's never acknowledged as abuse. When she does tell her mother, for example, that one of these older men basically molested her and almost raped her, the mother trivializes her claim and then says, why would anybody do that to you? I mean, firstly, you're a young boy. You don't have any wealth or any money on you. So why would such things happen to you in the first place? So she does. There are moments where she actually feels very hurt and invisibilized and insulted. But she's also very aware from a very young age of the fact that she has a certain sexual agency that she's not ashamed about. So
Right. I think it may also be maybe a kind of trap that readers may fall into, where they read these many episodes of encounters that Tanuja has with men, mostly ethnic Tamils in Europe, and could say that, look, this seems like, this looks like self-destructive behavior. It's very easy to be kind of to pass judgment on it and say that these are bad choices, for example. And I think we can give pause and think about all of these terms. Um, when can you make a bad choice? You can make a bad choice when you have choices. And I think all of this, to think about choice, to think about choices, agency, to to have a notion of what is the gallery of relationships available to one. Where do you gather this vocabulary from? And I think we have a rare moment here where Tanuja's autobiography also has many moments which are almost auto-anthropological. She's analyzing things that she did. And for example, the one of the examples she had, she says, I think I do this because because this must be because of watching Tamil movies. For example, she has this uncle, I think he's called Vinu Mama, who's abusive and who beats a young Tanuja for what he thinks is effeminate behavior. And she says, yeah, but he was so majestic. And even though he beat me, I looked up to him. And then in the next sentence, she says, and it must all be because because it must be from watching Tamil movies. And I think it's a rare and very interesting insight because it also speaks to one's notions of what ideal persons are like and what the so whether it's the tears streaming from the eyes joy that you feel when some man who later also abandoned you tied a marital string, the tali, around your neck, or this what seems like totally irrational um, attraction one seems to have for men who are violent and who beat you or who are being unfair. And you could say something about that
No,
perhaps.
I mean just to finish your thought. I mean that section with Vinu Mama towards the end is also very important because she actually ends up having sex with a man who once abused her when she was a child, and it is not worded. I'm trying to find the passage, but it's not being worded in terms of desire at all. I mean, it's not as if she desires him,
Yeah.
but the sexual act is an act of assertion,
Right.
and also an act. So she interprets it as a way in which she can expose Vinumama for his hypocrisy. Because if you're actually drawn to me now and you're willing to have sex with me now, what does that say about the fact that you once found me effeminate and for which you abused me and beat me up? So, and she later promptly says later after that you cannot, you as in referring to the mainstream reader, that you cannot actually understand our the pain and the humiliation that we go through because with your mainstream ideas and notions of gender, sexuality, consent. I mean, the whole question of consent and what is respectable, what is not, what is conventional and what is not. So I think that kind of speaks to what you were trying to say.
Could you tell us a little more about? I think also Tanuja doesn't flesh it out too much because she's sticking to her experiences. But about the this, what is this notion of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman that one would get from cinema? I'm sure it'll involve some degree of essentialization, but there are these types, these archetypes that are operating in people's minds, and I do think some of it comes from cinema. I do think a lot of it is very deep seated because also you must remember this is not a memoir from 50 years ago. Tanuja is not a 70-year-old person. You can see from the pictures, you can gauge, and if their childhood was spent using the internet, you kind of get a sense what period they are from.
I have a feeling that there is a slight slippage between what she seems to idealize as a form of femininity, which is in the form of a married wife who goes around doing domestic chores and or worships God and those kinds of notions. But and what she and the kind of women that she idealizes and she looks up to when she's growing up. I mean, one example, of course, is if you remember her school teacher. She had a school teacher who did not strike me as being someone who was a conventional feminine woman, right? And she was someone who was, in fact, from the way Tanuja describes her, someone who's very masculine and somebody who also kind of commands authority. If by masculine we mean that, right? So I mean, there's the sense that here is a woman who does not cry easily, someone who is resilient, someone who punishes students, someone who wields authority, someone who has a deep voice, and someone who also has long hair. So it's interesting that the descriptions don't quite map onto her more explicit and obvious idealizations of what she thinks a woman should be like or what she should be like. So I'm not sure if she's entirely aware of that, but that's what I find very interesting. There's a slight slippage. It doesn't entirely. She doesn't always describe women the way she would like herself to be, or she would want to emulate. So there is some. And talking about masculinity as well, I think it's also interesting that men like Vinumama also end up becoming these shriveled, emasculate shells. Like these like these I don't know what to call fossils. So she's very she's very she's out to shame him towards the end of the memoir. She actually humiliates him for being, or there are many other men she meets, many other Sri Lankan men, in fact, who are who cannot match up to her energy, her vivacity, and they seem to be men who have nothing to offer her beyond beyond a point. So I think there's that sense of pride. I think, like we were talking earlier, maybe I should have had some more assertive, positive words in the title, but a lot of it is really about assertion and pride towards the end of it, because she also is, and knowing her also as a person who has a very active social life on social media, that she is out there to also kind of disabuse other trans women of their, you know, pain and their own internalized inferiority. And she really wants to kind of be a mentor to a lot of other trans women as well. So there is that sense of assertion. She's very militant. She's very militant, unlike maybe, let's say, someone like Lakshmi Tripathi, who is also very interesting, but is not as militant, maybe because it's a generational thing. But certainly she and Revati as well are very militant about their identities as trans women. They will also at moments identify themselves as women, but there are moments where they'll identify themselves as trans women when it comes to, let's say, activism or other kinds of political kind of representation and so on. But so there is that bit as well, that we are women, but we're also, so I mean, so the question of language is also very important. I don't think they're all subscribing to, for example, pronouns like they and them. They're perfectly fine being he, she, but I mean she or he if it's a trans man. But it's also important to see how there's a certain plurality of expressions. There's a kind of plural set of voices, and you cannot collapse all trans women into one. A lot of what how they identify themselves also has to do with their class and their caste position, and so yeah.
I have more questions, but maybe we could do a round of discussion
Uh,
and
should we, or should we? What do you? We still have some time. If you,
okay.
if you have any other questions.
Now since you were speaking, you came to this topic of pronouns and how I've had similar discussions elsewhere, like in Palestine and in Israel, where people would say similarly, it's very hard to find to kind of carve out parallel set of neutral pronouns, whether it's in Arabic or Hebrew. And similarly, if you're speaking in Tamil or Kannada, I think it's also just to find some discursive units that also make sense to them. And you may remember we once spoke about, and I think it's also in the book, um, now the widely accepted Tamil word for a trans person, and especially for a trans woman. And the term was coined by the chief minister, also literary figure, Karunanidhi. So he coined the term Tirunangai, from Nangai, which means woman, but Tiru is this honorific prefix. So it's like a euphemism, like, I don't know, other such terminology that are invented often by bureaucratic minds. And yeah, I don't want to pass judgment on what's the value of this, of having a Tamil term. Is it Tirunambi for a trans man?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes.
Tirunambi and Tirunangai. And on the one hand, I think when there are also the movements of looking for political organization, for making counter hegemony movements, you want to be involved, you want policy support. I do think it's helpful to get these, but often, and perhaps understandably, individuals from the community, they seem to be, they almost scornful when we bring these up for discussion. And like you said, they are happiest if you call them akka, and you just use the nouns and pronouns that you use for a woman, and that says something. And I thought we could also speak about a theme which I felt um, is very central to the trans experience, but then is also something others can resonate with, which is about companionship and which is about community. And I feel this is another thread that runs through Tanuja's autobiography, which is about how from her childhood she felt this, that sometimes there was a sister who was sympathetic, who'd let her wear her clothes and would sometimes protect her from beatings. But the fact that one one has really nobody that you can call a friend, and the few people that seem to be that very often turn out to be someone who have another interest and who perhaps want sexual favors. um, and how this just experience of total alienation, this experience of not being able to, I think it's mitigated a bit at school. um, Tanuja finds both in Madurai and in Chennai and later in Germany, manages to find both male and female classmates who are somewhat friendly. But I think also later that she seeks out the Hijra community and feels the need to become a member of the Jamaat, while at the same time there's also this intellectual part of her which sees, hey, but look, what is happening through the hierarchy of the Jamaat? There are these senior figures who then force the junior members to pay them an annual tribute. And how are they asking them to do it? They are sometimes forced to go into sex work, whether they like it or not. But at the same time, she wants to be a part of a Jamaat. I think maybe you could even read a bit from the first time she meets her older sister in the Jamaat.
Right.
This is from a section called The New Amma, page 70, 77 to 79. Um, she's describing the trans woman, older sister in the Jamaat scheme. Priya Amma was neatly dressed in stylish clothes and looked like a European woman, but she looked darker than she did in pictures. Her face and her feet did not have the same complexion. She had brought some gifts for me and my family. According to trans woman culture, a woman must adopt another trans woman as her daughter by presenting her with a sari. A sari is related to a trans woman's identity and basic cultures, basic rights. The hardships and beatings we endure to wear a sari in public were not insignificant. When Priya Amma gave me a beautiful silk sari, my eyes filled with tears. And besides this, she also has a passage about how she planned and went to this on this trip to India, where she went to the temple of Aravan at Kuagam, which some of you may know about it. It's where there's this almost annual reunion of all the hijras from South Asia. So for one night, the story goes that there was this Prince Aravan, and for one night, um, Krishna became a woman and became his wife, and all the um, trans women they go to this temple, they dress up as a bride for that night, and then the next morning, this Prince Aravan dies, and they all go bathe in the river and come back as widows. But it's also this kind of annual congregation, and it's a very important festival for the trans women community. And it's so important for Tanuja that she do this. And I think also this signals um, really to this predicament of loneliness, and I think I don't have to describe it more. It is something that's accessible to everyone's experience in whatever degree. Maybe tell us a bit about the Jamaat and
Yes.
the need for we all need a certain Jamaat. We're all
Yes.
looking for a Jamaat. This gathering is a Jamaat after fashion.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, if you compare Revati and Tanuja's autobiographies, they both are framed by the Aravan, the Kuvagam festival, because for them it is this moment where they can get together as fellow co-wives and sisters, who all marry the same man through the priest, and then end up becoming widows and then lament. So it's an interesting kind of an occasion of lamentation, but also a deep sense of solidarity with the larger community, notwithstanding differences of very often class, uh, sometimes even caste. So I think it's a constant negotiation. I mean, I feel even for Revati, she has to constantly move between Delhi and Bombay and the different gharanas in the Jamaat, because the different gharanas are responsible for different kinds of tasks, some begging, some sex work, some performance, and then having to negotiate with violent clients who very often refuse to wear condoms. So there are all these challenges that they face. But of course, for Tanuja, uh, their perception of sex work also is very interesting, because I feel like some people like Tanuja might feel like it's beneath me to be a sex worker. I might be a high-end escort and have elite clients, which doesn't make me feel, I don't know, as exploited or as cheap as maybe other poorer sex workers who actually do brothel-based sex work. So there's a certain sense of autonomy, perhaps a certain sense of privacy, which may not be guaranteed in a brothel-based sex work, and you don't have middlemen. But then you also have, like I mentioned earlier, the fact that you have to negotiate with trans mothers and trans grandmothers and your gurus, and even if you are in Europe, even if you are westernized, even if you have a supportive family, you need these people to kind of empathize with you, especially when you have heartbreaks, you have betrayals, you have been raped. You need their support, right? And then, but then at the same time, there's this very exploitative relationship which exists because you have to, by ritual and by custom, give a certain portion of your earnings to your mother as or grandmother, whoever, as guru dakshina, right? So there is that issue as well. So what I find interesting is that despite her privileges, despite her education, she's inextricably tied to the hijra community and the trans female community, which um, means that she really has to constantly negotiate, right? And it's not, I mean, she can't entirely free herself, and she's also committed as an activist, so I think she also has to be a part of their lives. But yeah.
Speaking of inextricable ties, so there are many very revealing passages. For instance, Tanuja, who spent part of her childhood in Sri Lanka and then in India, in Madurai and Chennai and so on, speaks about how they became aware of caste in Germany. And it's there that you saw this kind of heightened discussion about, she speaks about this, the father figure who was an alcoholic, who wasn't very attentive, who was abusive, who ran into debt. But the father, he knew every single Vellada Tamil in the city that they lived in and also in the rest of Germany. And they were strictly instructed at home about which Tamil homes they could go to and eat and not eat, and which people they could speak to and not speak to. So I feel, like you said now about the Hijra community, at the same time, it clearly comes across how Tanuja says it about the Tamilness after fashion, and how these choices with regard to Tamil men is probably almost there's a fatalistic quality to it. But it looks like this Tamil identity, and also it's not some generic Tamil. It is very clearly this Ira Tamil, the Sri Lankan um, Tamil identity, and there is a particularity to that, and there are their networks, and their life is kind of framed and boundaried by that. So there's your ethnic identity, there's your linguistic identity, and there's also the caste identity, and it's against these kind of almost frameworks of steel that you forge and kind of make the identity that you would like to have.
In fact, there's a moment where her brother thrashes her for dating Tamil men. And I think the concern there is that the family's reputation will be. So he says, "Why can't you date white men? Men who don't know us. They don't know of our existence." The problem is that we are so well connected that, and there's another instance also where when she is still before she transitions. She has a very close female friend in the school who belongs to a lower caste, and somebody in the school reports to her parents that she's befriending a girl from a lower caste community, and so that becomes a big deal. That initially they're like, okay, finally maybe he has a girlfriend, but then why does she have to belong to this caste, right? So that becomes an issue. In fact, interestingly, even with Revati, who's of course, so neither of them are belong to non-dominant castes. They both belong to dominant castes. Revati is a Gounder and she's a Vellala. And in Revati's autobiography as well, she has a similar predicament, although it's not primarily about caste or casteism, but even there you have the sense that, being a Gounder, there is a lot of consciousness about who are you befriending, in whose house are you eating, who are you dating, who are you going to marry. So I mean, these questions are there, some in the background, but at some point, I think in both the memoirs, there is the question of gender becomes more prominent than the question of caste. But yes, like you said very interestingly, I think the experience of caste becomes very evident when you're abroad, right? And it I think it also has to do with the relationships between different diasporic people who belong to the same community who are diasporic, or maybe people who belong to different caste groups, maybe all from Sri Lanka. What kinds of animosities and intimacies become possible precisely because they don't live in Sri Lanka, and they are away, and they also have memories of Sri Lanka, which is civil war tone and all that. But the fact that what does it mean to be away from Sri Lanka and have these kinds of intimacies, uh, and the fact that the virtual spaces in many ways also help you undercut to a certain extent these social hierarchies, up to a point at least, until the family intervenes. But it's-
So something we see both in Revati's Veldai Murray and not so explicitly in Tanuja, but I do think she's making this point, is that they both speak about this kind of emancipative quality of education. So Revati, when also in some interview, I think someone asked, "What would you, if you had to go back and give advice to your younger self, what would you say?" And she says this. She says, "Go get an education. All of us are fighting very hard so that you can just be a person and not a some kind of an exotic, bizarre creature, and go study well and be an engineer, doctor, collector, the trifecta." And we also see Tanuja saying this, that at some point she made this decision that while she was not averse to sex work, she said, "I don't want to do this," and she clearly sees that she has to be an exemplar for the community. And what an exemplar for the community does is not to be this cliche. And there's not me judging that. I think that's how Tanuja feels, and therefore I will kind of take up some garden variety profession. She studies to be a dental hygienist, but is also very proud to be like a social media influencer. But this seems to be important, and I feel that kind of coheres with the idea of some kind of a normality. That I'm a normal person, I'm a normal woman. I'd like to have a normal relationship. I'd like a normal family. Perhaps also what they see as it's we could say that these normals are problematic. These normals are reductive. Nonetheless, we must respect uh, the way they take it. But can you say something about both of them still seeing this kind of a university education and or university degree as this kind of pathway to
yeah, that's true. I mean, I think she also has a very close relationship to, I think, a Swiss German woman who becomes her mentor, professor, who is researching on trans women and their predicaments. So I think her relationship with that woman, I think, is very important for Tanuja in making this decision to actually study well, to get a job, and to actually be a mentor for other trans women. But what is also interesting is I think a lot of this decision making, this journey, is determined by her relationships with other trans women, Tamil speaking trans women from other parts of the Tamil speaking world, whether it's Malaysia or Singapore or India. There is this sense that, I mean, you can see her experiences of, I mean, the kind of the sympathy she feels for other trans women who are poor, people who don't have food to eat, people who are not educated, people who are begging, people who are violated as sex workers. So, I mean, there's this sense that that she's actually kind of aware of her privilege, especially when her family becomes more and more supportive, and the fact that she has the time and the money to be able to pursue her education whenever she wants to, unlike India where it's very age specific. So the fact that she can resume her education later in life, and she's aware of the fact that her mother and her brother and her sister have actually embraced her for what she is. So that, in some sense, emboldens her to actually make certain choices, which would not have been possible otherwise. So I think she's very aware of the fact that it's not a one woman act. I mean, that there are all these other people and circumstances that have made her what she is. So I think I would say she's very empathetic and very humble that way. I think she's not, I mean, for all the assertion and all the pride, she knows where the pride comes from. It's not just, me and my life. She's not selfish. So I think, which is what I found very interesting.
while we wait for someone to formulate the question, I asked you all this while about Tanuja's book, but could you tell us something about your experience translating it, because you also began by saying how you were kind of, and I think that was the literature professor giving a report card saying that I read all these biographies, they seem to be poorly crafted, and I think
Right.
it's also interesting when they're poorly crafted, because it says that there isn't a ready-made vocabulary, there isn't a ready-made
Yeah.
grammar to
True.
say the things you want to say.
That is true. That's very true. It's a good point, actually. I think, see, a lot of the early works I read from the 1970s or 60s, where you have, let's say, a stray character, a minor character, or a character who is displays certain queer characteristics, but it's not entirely explored, or it's suppressed at some point,
Or is a caricature.
or it's a caricature, or very often is killed off because you don't know what to do with the character. So that there are all those instances that I'm like you said, I think even if one were actually to do a reading of, let's say, canonical LGBT fiction from the West, you will notice very similar. I mean, you see a lot of the early kind of lesbian writers from the early 20th or even late 19th century. I mean, all the characters, most of them are, like, for example, the Well of Loneliness. I mean, she drowns and she ends her own life. Now, there's no problem with that as such. It's just that, when one is looking at a long durée kind of thing, then you kind of see, you obviously you can't help yourself, but all as readers we do compare and we do make these intertextual references, implicit or otherwise, and then you realize that this could have been done better. But I think if you were, let's say, more sympathetic to that particular moment, then I'm sure, I mean, I think maybe they also make a statement and they also trying to say something, despite the fact that they are muffled or suppressed or whatever, overshadowed by norms. But I think, yeah, so I think similarly, in a lot of Tamil writing, which is not obviously selling or presenting itself as queer writing, like, it's important to kind of see, because also of the lack of scholarship. I mean, it's difficult to identify. You'll have to actually literally go and find stories and novels. But if you read them, and from what I've read so far, I think some of them are meant to evoke the reader's sympathy. But it's just that, if you looked at, let's say, someone like her or somebody else, exploiting the genre of the autobiography, and I think there's more to be wanted. I mean, even these fictional writings, very often they are very often told in the first person, and very often they're also told, it seems like it's semi autobiographical, but it's also fiction. So you have these boundaries also being blurred in many ways. So it's kind of hard sometimes to say if this is a. So it's. I mean, there's another very interesting story, for example, by this writer called M.V. Venkatram, who has a story about a man who cross dresses when he's alone at home, when suddenly his wife discovers him, and the wife is not shocked. I mean, she kind of embraces him for what he is. But I think it's interesting that you have a story about a man who's cross-dressing but doesn't necessarily identify himself as queer or whatever. So these subtleties are there, but one has to hunt and look for them.
Right.
It's not everywhere, So
Hi, Kiran.
yes.
My questions are to you. A couple of questions. Very simplistic questions. Very interesting topic, of course, for me to read about these and come about this particular genre of writing and issues. So, does Tanuja refer to the book written by Revati?
Not in the memoir, but in interviews, she has said that Revati's book and Revati's life has been an inspiration for her. So it's not so much in the memoir itself.
How many years is gap between Revati's book and Tanuja's autobiography?
2011. So interestingly, Revati's book, the English translation came out first, and then the original came out. And her explanation for it was that she actually wanted her memoir to go out to a larger bunch of people, especially people who were not her family. She wanted outsiders, people who are English speakers, to read the memoir first, and then get a sense of the response of the readers. And then 4 years later, she came out with the top. So it's very unusual. Right? I mean, normally you get the original and then you have the translation. So I feel the translator of V. Gita, who translated Revati's memoir, was probably translated the manuscript and then came out, and then Revati came out with the Tamil one. So it's very interesting. Yeah. So that's the.
So my last question is
Sorry, the time interval is around 20. Sorry, it's about 10 years, yes.
10 years.
10 years, yeah.
So now that this translation of yours will definitely have a wider audience, particularly in India, do you think more such people will start writing about their, trials and tribulations, and we could see more people write these kind of books? And
No, it's already happening actually. I mean, the 2010s and the 2000s and the 2010s has already seen many memoirs in Kannada, Marathi, Hindi, Malayalam. So I mean, there's already a lot. I mean, there's quite a bit, and I think they're also responding to each other because many of these trans women are also very multilingual. So, for example, Revati sings. She may not write necessarily in Kannada, but she's fluent in Kannada. She can speak fluently. She can sing in these different languages. So it's not always writing as the medium. I think very often there's a lot of exchange happening in terms of pride events, NGOs, protest marches that very often take the form of song marches, slogans. So I mean I've met her in person, so I've noticed how what a polyglot she is. I mean, she knows so many languages and she knows folk songs in all these different languages. So it's really amazing. I mean, they have a very rich exchange of the print medium, right? So that's very interesting. I have not met her personally, but I have interacted because I think all translations have to be collaborative. It can't just me deciding how to translate something. I have asked her many questions, in fact, about certain Sri Lankan Tamil idioms, proverbs, derogatory terms, how to translate them, if at all. I haven't translated everything. Some I've left in the original, but it's interesting in terms of how translation becomes an interpretive act. You have to interpret something, you're translating something. So that can only be best done through a collaboration with the author. So, uh, well, she has come. She has come. She has come pretty often, and she comes, of course, for the Kuakam festival, but she also comes for many other press conferences, events, meeting other trans women. She also has trans daughters from India, so it's a very close knit.
I see there's another question here.
Hi, good
Yeah.
evening.
Good
So I
evening.
just wanted to ask in what ways we as readers can engage with um, literature and especially trans literatures and memoirs without reducing them to traumatic spectacles.
Traumatic spectacles. Without reducing them. So the thing is, yes,
The first step is by not using so many adjectives
right.
like fraught and what's the other
That's
one?
right. And precarious.
Precarious.
Yes.
Precarious
Yes.
and fraught, which are
Yes.
vital.
Yes. Yes. No, I mean, yeah. I think. See, there are moments where there's a deep sense of dissociation. If by trauma you mean a dissociation between the mind and the body, and I also feel like trauma very often is also being bandied about and abused. So I think one should also be a little specific about that term and not reduce everything to trauma either. But there are moments where the experience of sexual violence, sexual abuse, even if it is not being acknowledged as such, is a great source of humiliation and shame for Tanuja. And for Tanuja, her femininity very often becomes a very ambivalent source of both suffering and pride, right? So it's a little difficult to dissociate these two. There are moments where she feels. I mean, I don't think she ever wishes that she ever regrets wanting to transition. That is not the point. She always thought of herself as a woman, and as a trans woman in certain other contexts. But she really wants to embrace her femininity, but there are also times where she feels that so for example, there are times where she feels that I wish I didn't have a penis. It's such an unwanted, unnecessary appendage. I want to get rid of it. But there are times where she also feels that being a woman is also not easy, right? So I mean, you kind of you lose some of the privileges, some of the kind of the invisibility of being a man sometimes, in a positive sense, because men are not always gazed at, they're not always being raped, and you don't have the same gender hierarchy. So there is that sense as well that transitioning, and the other interesting thing is physically transitioning is only a part of it. The point is that she identifies herself as someone who is feminine in whatever notion of femininity that she would like to embrace. But the fact is that she realizes that uh, whether she tucks her penis into her underwear, whether she is effeminate, or whether she actually transitions. It doesn't matter. I mean, the point is that she always encounters the male gaze, and it's not easy to kind of free yourself of it. So there are moments, and there are also times where she actually has very rewarding friendships with men. It's not as if all the men in the memoir are awful people. Many of them are friends. Many of them become friends. But what's interesting is that those friends never become her lovers for some reason. There's a very interesting kind of line between friendship and love, and the question of love becomes very fraught. I mean, the memoir actually ends on a very open note. It's not. It doesn't end on a happy ending as such that she's finally found her man and now she's happy. It's not that. But it's interesting to see that her friendships don't always with men don't always end in marriage or a romantic relationship. While her romantic relationships, some of them, the better ones, they end, and most of them end on betrayal or violence. Right? And I think somehow she comes to terms with that. I think somehow she feels that after a point when she decides to actually become educated and and become a working woman, I mean, she realizes that she doesn't need men beyond a point. There's a sense that I enjoy my singleness and my freedom. So there's that.
Yeah, add something to that. And I think it kind of connects to both questions. You were asking earlier, would Tanuja like to come here, do an interview, and speak about her trials and tribulations? And you mentioned how we can engage with trauma. But actually, uh, which is all fair, it's reasonable. But I wonder if are we perhaps focusing only on some things? Because in my reading of Tanuja's account of herself, what I notice is there isn't this. While that there are detailed descriptions of horrific things and also descriptions of things that are just sad. This isn't someone who is crying a lament of their victimhood, and what you see is a certain matter of factness, and I feel to to also receive that is valuable. And what this brings to mind for me is the Kannada Dalit poet Siddhalingaya. So he wrote in several installments his autobiography called Uru Keri, which means the city and the slum or something, the city and the village or something like that. And he's speaking about his experience from his childhood to when he moved to Bangalore, when he was a student, when he stops when he started being this somewhat successful figure, because perhaps he thought it got boring then. And also there, you find that there are almost no moments of self pity or of speaking about this kind of inescapable victimhood or something like that. And I think there is something precious there, and there's something to be said for holding on to this as a kind of document of pride. And I think we should spend some time thinking about pride, because there's several species of this beast called pride. There's a form which is in the form of, say, linguistic chauvinism or national chauvinism, but there's also this form which is about taking comfort in self-expression, and kind of, I even hesitate to use the word assert. I think it's too strong a word. It's just about um, being, and being comfortable being the way one is being. And I feel often in many of these accounts, I feel to a large extent, even in Revati's autobiography, it's there are these difficult passages, but somehow I feel in Tanuja, and as I was saying in Siddhalingaya, often at least for me, what stayed with me was their descriptions of happy moments, and that they're also able to see this, that it's not just some entirely black bitter story about. And also, if you look at their life now, Tanuja is a somewhat well-adjusted person, is not paranoid and suspicious of everyone of the world, and is making a life, and is doing things, and also is not some pompous white knight for the community. And I think that's wonderful. And perhaps there are some mantras for engagement in just within the texts themselves and the tenor in which they speak.
I think an example of that would be the fact that she tries to commit suicide at least twice, and then she
Right.
emerges from it stronger than before. Right. So I think there's a sense of, like, I think Revati, like you rightly said, there's a lot of bleakness in a lot of. It's a very sad but very beautiful book nonetheless. But Tanuja seems to be more. I don't know if it's because of the age. I don't know, because she's much younger and but she just seems a lot more exuberant and a lot more vivacious than Revati is for the most part.
I see there's a question back there. If you have a moment, let's take it.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. It was really great. I wanted to ask, so I think you briefly mentioned like in the way that she describes her like longing for femininity, some of it has to do with or is associated with maybe like problematic quote unquote notions of femininity. Could you expand on that a little bit and like how she acknowledges it specifically?
No, I mean, just that one line that she says that progressive women might mock me for wanting a thali. I mean, the fact that she's aware of the fact that this might seem silly and sentimental to women who want to be outside the fold of marriage, who would like to have partnerships that are not about marriage. So I think that sense, and I think even Revati also says it, that she thinks that she is. I mean, she's not ashamed of it, but she's aware. She's reflexive enough to say that to want this kind of an idealized Hindu wifehood is may not be the only expression of femininity. And this is something she realizes when she moves to a city and she notices she interacts with many other queer groups, and she realizes that there are many other people who are marginalized in other ways, which allows her to have conversations with people who are Dalit or women who have been battered, so on and so forth. The problems that are specific to cis women, I mean, these kinds of course, very again fraught debates, but nonetheless, the fact that these urban spaces allow them to have other kinds of conversations. But it's also very estranging for people to like Revati because these are English speaking groups. And many trans women are not English speaking. I mean, English is not their first language, right? So it's important to also have these discussions in other languages as well. Yes.
Thank you so much. That was super fascinating debate, and thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.
I was wondering, you were talking a lot about migration as well at the beginning, and was wondering if you could expand a little bit more about like transnational communities and the formation of like, how she specifically sought out Tamil-speaking men, Tamil-speaking communities,
Yeah.
and how she sort of maintained ties with these communities back home. Instead, I also wanted to know. I mean, I've not yet read the memoir, and I'm definitely going to pick it up, but did she interact with a lot of trans women in Germany and in the other places that she visited, and how did that?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. So the thing is, she I think like Naresh already said, I think many of her idealizations of Tamil men are based also on uh, cinema and TV as well as certain shows. But she also comes out of it at some point. I think initially there's a certain kind of repetitive cycle of eroticism and violence that fuels each other, and then there's a point where she actually snaps out of it. But it's a process of learning and unlearning certain things. And she also realizes that so the other question of course is that there's a meeting of trans women with German trans women, and she is struck by the fact that she is the youngest there. And she also wonders why trans women are not as culturally visible in Europe as they are in, let's say, South Asia. And the fact that trans women in South Asia have enjoyed a longer history of a certain kind of cultural prestige and religious significance, which they may not have had in Europe. So she's struck by that difference. And when she also goes to get her gender reassignment surgery done, there's a Turkish doctor who performs the surgery for her, and he is struck by the fact that he has never seen someone so young. And the impression she gets is that trans women who are like Western, like German trans women, they probably come out later in life. That's essential.
Okay, on behalf of all of you, I'll thank Kiran,
Thank you. Thank you.
and good evening, everyone.
Thank you all for coming.